Welcome to the Parkway. I'm Michelle Gatchell, and I'm here with my co-host Roger Ingles, and we are here with the illustrious Jack Park. Hey, Jack.
Great to be with you, Roger, Michelle. Great to be with you here on a cold February night, and there's nothing like talking about sports.
Well, before we get into like a total sports conversation, because we're going to talk about the OSU bowl game, but it was announced this week that you are the Ohio State Football Person of the Year for 2021, according to Columbus Aganis Club. Congratulations.
Well, Michelle, thank you very much. I feel very honored. I'm humbled by this very, very, very much. It did come as a complete surprise. What is it? What's the old saying? This came out of left field, you know? And so this past week or 10 days has been very exciting for me, and I feel very, very honored and everything for that. And I appreciate your comments very, very much. And it's just a very, very nice honor, and I appreciate it.
Congratulations, Jack, because there's definitely no one that deserves it more than you do.
Well, you're kind, very kind. Thank you.
The other thing is, too, you're with some pretty good company. You got these coaches, these football players, some basketball players, a few writers, but none that do writing. You're an author, you do radio, you're a historian galore. I mean, you got if it was like, what's it called when you get the Oscars and the Emmys and you're one of those people. You got it all.
Well, this award recognition, basically, it doesn't always have to be a football related one, Ohio State football, although most of them have been. Most of the annual Person of the Year awards have come out of Ohio State football, though. I mean, there's been Woody Hayes and Jim Tressel and guys, Earl Bruce, John Cooper, and you go clear back, a sports writer by the name of Kay Kessler. And I can remember as a kid growing up, our family subscribed to the, what at that time was the Columbus Citizen newspaper. When I was a kid, there were 3 newspapers in Columbus. There was 2 evening papers, the Columbus Dispatch and the Columbus Citizen, and then the morning paper, the Ohio State Journal. And our family subscribed to the Columbus Citizen, and Kay Kessler was the main sports writer for them. And so I read everything as a kid I could read on Ohio State football. It was written by Kay Kessler. Coincidentally, many, many years later, I got to meet him and got to know him a little bit. And then when he retired from the Citizen, he was a big guy on covering golf. I know he moved to Denver and has covered golf out there. I don't know how old Kay is right now. He's up in years quite a bit. It's my understanding he's still living there. But to be in his company, although a lot of people probably don't recognize the name Kay Kessler today, but to be in his company was quite, for me, quite an honor also.
Yeah, he was one of the true great sports writers in Columbus.
Yeah.
And, and then later on, the Journal and the Citizen joined, right? And they become the Columbus Citizen Journal. Yeah. And I believe he carried on and continued then with them for a while.
And his counterpart at the Dispatch, which was a very competing newspaper, they were both evening newspapers. Of course, his counterpart over there was maybe even more well-known, and that was Paul Hornung. And Paul Hornung was a longtime sports editor of the Columbus Dispatch and a very close friend of Woody Hayes. Mm-hmm. And Paul, of course, the Dispatch at that time had what they called the Columbus Dispatch Quarterback Club. And it was open to about 800 people. And the dues were very high. It was $1 a year to belong. And Woody Hayes would speak to this group every Wednesday night at the Ohio Union. And the team would have their practices on Wednesdays, and then they'd have their dinner. And then Woody would slip by for maybe 30 minutes and would address the downtown quarterback club. Mm-hmm. And Paul Hornung was the guy that basically started that. They had a lot of help and everything like that. My dad was a member of that, and he lived for Wednesday nights to go to those meetings and hear Woody Hayes speak and everything like that. And so Paul also was a huge, huge part of the history of Ohio State football media guys. Paul Hornung, Kay Kessler, and even back before that, there was a guy named Lou Byer, which was before my time. But in the research I've done, by going back into the old newspapers, I've read a lot of fine columns that were written back in the 30s and the 40s by a man by the name of Lou Byer. And he was, just a very fine sports writer.
Well, great company. Well, what are you going to do for the year to celebrate?
Well, I don't know. I'm just going to celebrate by hoping that I'll continue to support the football team, and hopefully we'll have another great season this year. Maybe take another run at the national championship and everything like that. But I don't know if I'm going to really do too much to celebrate.
Well, let's talk about the bowl game from this last year. Gosh, so much to talk to you both about, but what were your overall thoughts just in general, just to start?
Well, Ohio State obviously played one of its best halves ever, I think, in that first half against Clemson. And, of course, had a great win against Clemson with high hopes going against Alabama. And, of course, having a little bit of a tough time with Northwestern in the beginning to get into the Clemson game, really. In the Big Ten title game, when you look back at playing Northwestern, we were down at the halftime, basically. Came back and won that game pretty handily. I think we scored the last 16 points of the game. But the Clemson win was big. It was really big. I think when I had high hopes going into the Alabama game, I really did. In fact, on the radio, I actually predicted a 3-point Ohio State win. I predicted 31-28. Of course, I've never, ever predicted an Ohio State loss, so you have to kind of take some of my predictions with a grain of salt a little bit. But I thought we had a decent chance. And in all the years I've covered college football, I'm not sure I've ever seen a better team than Alabama this past year. And it really doesn't take anything away from Ohio State. I mean, Ohio State had a great team, but this Alabama team was one for the ages in almost every respect of the game, from coaching to offensive and defensive line play to the skilled positions to speed and just the tenacity and the tremendous strength of both lines and everything. Saban is I don't know if he's a better coach at Alabama than Bear Bryant. I mean, for Alabama fans, that would be a great debate. They're two completely different eras, and it's often hard to compare them. That would be like comparing Urban Meyer or Jim Tressel with Woody Hayes, who was the greatest coach there. They're different eras. And but Saban certainly has put himself in a class of one of the very greatest of all time. He's 69 years old now. It'll be interesting to see how much longer he continues. But of course, Nick is originally from Ohio. Well, he actually grew up in West Virginia, but he went to school at Kent State. In fact, he was on the Kent State campus the day of the shootings. I think that was May the 4th, I believe was the date, May 4th or May 5th of 1970. Yeah. And he and a friend, they weren't participating. They weren't at all protesting, but they had decided, as Nick tells the story, they had decided to go out and see what the protests were all about and just observe the protests around noon that day. And they decided, well, let's eat lunch in our cafeteria first, then we'll go out and watch the protests. And while they were eating lunch is when the shootings took place. That doesn't in any way mean that they would necessarily have been in the way of the shootings, but that's where he was at that time, of course. And Nick also was a 2-year assistant here at Ohio State under Earl Bruce. About 40 years ago now. He was the defensive backfield coach in 1980 and 1981 under Earl. So he definitely has some Ohio ties, and coached at the University of Toledo, was on the staff at the Cleveland Browns at one time and everything, and moved around quite a bit. Maybe his greatest victory until he got to Alabama was when he was at Michigan State. And Michigan State came down here in 1998 when John Cooper probably had as one of the finest teams Ohio State will ever have. And the Buckeyes led 24-9 early in the fourth quarter. And under the direction of Nick Saban, Michigan State scored the last 4 times they had the ball and beat Ohio State 28-24 in one of the great comebacks of all time. It really, in Big Ten football, that prevented Ohio State from playing in that year what would have been the BCS game. It's interesting. That was a game where Michigan State played way beyond what anybody expected them to play. That was our only loss that year. And Nick Saban's Michigan State team that year finished at 6-6.
You know, Jack, going into the bowl game with Alabama, we knew they were well coached. I mean, every recruit that Nick Saban has brought to Alabama had played on a national championship team, except for the group that was there right now. And they, of course, now they all have. So obviously he's a great recruiter. And going into the game, I thought there were three big question marks. The first one was, what kind of shape was Justin Fields in? He had, been injured in Northwestern. He had a little bit of time to recover, but quickly got hurt again, I thought, in the Clemson game. He took that hit from their linebacker. Healed up a little bit, but he was not the quarterback that we had seen early in the year, last year. I mean, that was the first question. Give me your thoughts on what impact you thought that his physical abilities had or were limited in that game.
Yeah, Justin definitely was not at 100%. I don't think he was at the same level he was what would have been 10 days earlier against Clemson, really. And he took some hits in that Clemson game. I don't know, maybe they didn't completely heal going into the Alabama game. Ohio State, as they should be, were pretty closed mouth about what the status of the players are and what may have happened in practice. And you want to be that way because you don't want to give any, unnecessary advantage to the opposition and everything. But there were many games this year where I thought he was in better physical condition and so forth. And the other thing that really, really hurt Ohio State was Trey Sermon getting hurt. And that, I think it was his first carry, wasn't it? The first carry of the game, something he came out. And he had such tremendous yardage against Clemson and had really finished the season very, very, very strong. So losing him early in the game definitely it hurt them. And that puts more pressure on Fields when you've got such a tremendous running back now on the sidelines. And you become a little bit more one-dimensional. And, of course, that plays right into the hands of the defense. And we saw that happen.
Yeah, and I think that was something we talked about in the show before the game. Is I had mentioned that obviously Alabama was talented on offense when three of the top 5 Heisman Trophy votes getters were offensive players at Alabama, and their quarterback, their running back, and their wide receiver. And then for Ohio State to be successful in this game, we thought that they obviously have to slow the Alabama offense. Well, the way you do that is you got to control the ball when you have it. You got to eat up time. You got to keep them off the field. Well, when you lose your best running back in the first play of the game, and your second best running back is banged up, in Justin Fields, because that was our running threat through most of the year, it really limited our ability to have those 6, 7, 8-minute drives to keep their offense off the field, and it kept putting our defense back on the field to try and face those players. And I think you're exactly right. Trey Sermon's injury was huge, and compiled on top of that with Justin's limited ability in some ways. I mean, he could throw the ball, and he did that, and he played a great game, but he wasn't the running threat that we had seen him be in the past. And then the other thing that I thought hurt us that maybe a lot of people didn't talk about was the loss of our great defensive lineman, Togiai, right? Yeah. I mean, his loss being out because of the virus really hurt us. I mean, that's a key player in the middle of that line, especially in a run-stopping situation. So they now have the ability to run the ball a little bit more. And, of course, they have a great running back to go with. But then you bring in that wide receiver who I don't think we've seen anything like that in a couple years. That young man, Devontae Smith, has incredible speed. Yeah. And their game plan, I thought, was tremendous. And I don't know that Ohio State didn't adjust or we just didn't have the players to adjust to be able to take him out of his motion. I mean, they used him with a lot of, zip zap type motion where they brought him into the huddle and then kicked him back out the way he came, or they kept him, running. The 4th and 1 was one play, I think, that late in the game was huge where we couldn't cover him. No. And he wasn't, they kept him off the line of scrimmage where we couldn't get a hand on him and try and play some, rough him up a little bit with some bump and run coverage. We definitely couldn't run with him. And then the last thing I thought, and I kind of get your thoughts on this, is we had some great linebackers at Ohio State when it came to run stop.
Yes.
We had some guys that weren't very good in pass coverage, and they had an ability to take advantage of a couple of our guys and get them on some fast receivers, either the running backs or receivers, and trying to chase those guys up the field. And we didn't fare very well with that.
No, our pass coverage, basically in all three of those games. I mean, the Northwestern game and certainly Clemson, and then Alabama. At times, our pass coverage was not very good. It really wasn't very good. And you take somebody like Smith that has all types of ability. He's tremendously fast. He's very agile. I mean, he has tremendous ability to get up in the air and to make the different moves in different directions. They can play him a lot of different positions, which they did. And he can run a variety of routes, and all of them just as good, one just as good as another. And eventually it gets to the place that maybe you can't cover somebody like that the way you want to do. You've got great players on your defense, but they can only do so much too. And I think in a situation like that where the offense knows what they're going to do, the defense has to guess and line up in a certain type of defensive formation. When you have an offense that is as talented as Alabama, that becomes even more of an advantage. And I think they showed that particularly as the game went along and so forth. But Smith might have been the best opposing wide receiver Ohio State has faced in I don't know how many years, really. He really was. And that's not taking anything away from our defensive backs. They were just up against a tremendously talented young man. And I think he deserves all the accolades he got and continues to receive, basically. And I would be tremendously surprised if he does not have an outstanding NFL career.
Addition of Jalen Waddle into the game for Alabama too, the wide receiver who'd been out hurt. Yep. They had some injuries of their own. They lost their starting center, Dickerson, I think it was, in the conference championship game. He was hurt, so they had a backup center in the game. But Jalen Waddle had been out, and Waddle was talked about on the same kind of level as Devontae Smith, that same type of talent. And having him come back and have the ability to play, I thought really stressed the defense, because now you couldn't just focus on Smith because you do have that other threat. And he's another guy that can beat you up the field.
It was just, I think, a game where the better team definitely won, and there is nothing to be ashamed of on Ohio State's part to play the season they did under the conditions that they did. Thank goodness we got a new president in that really helped support the program once she came in. But up until then, I'm not sure we had the support of the administration. And the new lady that came in as president, Johnson, but she was a blessing to the football program, without question there. And of course, she played a lot of college sports herself and everything like that. And I think that's one of the things that might get overlooked over the years, is to the support that she provided to make sure that the Big Ten played football this fall.
Well, I think that Coach Day and the staff, after watching the film, all coaches do. It might not have been that night, but they definitely watched it. Yeah. Would have seen that they were a few unfortunate breaks away from being much more competitive in that football game. And if Trey Sermon stays healthy, if Justin had been able to stay healthy, if they had a full defensive line in that game, if a couple plays here or there, a catch is made or a tackle is made, that could have been a much more competitive game. So I think Ohio State's got to feel, overall, they still got to feel pretty good about the type of year that they went through, not even knowing if they're going to play, to be able to get in the championship game, play a team of Alabama's caliber. And they've set themselves going into next year now with a great recruiting class. Yeah. In fact, a lot of those kids, I guess, are already on campus because they signed in the early period. But it's right now, it's the number 2 ranked recruiting class in the country. And from what I've heard is they have 5 5-star prospects, over a dozen 4-star prospects. They got the top wide receiver in the country, and three of the receivers coming in are top 100 guys. They got a great safety and a great defensive end from here in Columbus. Jack, I guess looking forward, you've been around, you've seen all these teams, you've seen the different bowl games that Ohio State's played. How do you think Ohio State feels now going into next year, coming off of this, knowing the guys that they have coming in, the guys they have coming back. To me, the big question on the wall is who's going to be underneath center or behind center next year when we're snapping.
Of course, in that game against Alabama, we had to do some shifting on the offensive line too, with the injuries and everything like that. And of course, we got a lot of depth. And they all played well. And everybody has situations like that. We're not the only one. Nobody else is immune to that and everything. It's my understanding, and I've got this word kind of hearsay. I have not learned this officially, but it's my understanding that we have 17 players on campus now that basically are incoming freshmen. And I don't know what degree they're working out, but that's a lot, and that will help us tremendously. And I just hope, particularly after what happened last spring, where I think we had 3 practices and then the whole spring football season was over. You know, there's some teams that didn't even have 1 practice last year. They had it all. And we had 3. I don't know that 3 is a whole lot better than none, but it's a little bit better than none. But one thing that'll help everybody is if we can have a regular spring practice. You're allowed 15 practices, and that includes the spring game. And with this many new players coming in, I think that's really, really important to have those practices. Now, practices, I don't care how much you scrimmage against each other, practices are not like games. And we had, 75 practices last year, something like 75 practices when we finally got back and got where we could have simulated practices of some type, and some players could play and some couldn't, but everything. And that sounds like a lot of good preparation, but those 75 practices are not like playing the game every Saturday afternoon. They just aren't. I don't care if you're playing, Alabama AT&T or somebody like that, where we played some teams that were obviously very, very underpowered compared to us, but at least it's a game. And, of course, you love to play games like against Wisconsin and Michigan, of course, there, and Michigan State and Penn State, and those games really help you out. And so I think the big thing is we get through spring practice, we have a full spring practice, we have a spring game, and then hopefully a 12-game schedule next year. And everybody has a 12-game schedule next year. We can play some non-conference games. We can play our 9 league games that we're supposed to play on a regular basis. And then maybe if Ohio State would make it to the Big Ten title game in Indianapolis then after the end of the regular season, and then go on from there.
You know, interestingly, gentlemen, I heard Coach Day talk this week about how COVID on one level has really helped this freshman class bond more, because before they even hit the campus, they've been doing these Zoom meetings and getting to know each other. And so they arrived here and they don't have that stranger, you have to get through being strangers. They're already kind of bonded and gotten to know each other. So that's just like one step forward.
The Zoom type of sessions have really changed football in many ways. I mean, Coach Gagliardi, who was up in Minnesota for years in Division III, had a great football program. It was in the playoffs every year, never hit in practice. They wore shorts. They wear the shoulder pads and shorts. And everybody was always like, how can you do that? How can you do that? But, he didn't want to beat his guys up. He wanted to beat, if they're going to get hurt, or physical, it was going to be on Saturday afternoons. And I think you learned with the Cleveland Browns this year, with the COVID issues they had in the last 3 weeks of the season, the amount of work that they put in over Zoom and in team meetings, and they were implementing game plans and stuff. And Ohio State did the same thing. I'm wondering, Jack, if you think you're going to see a change a little bit in style, or do you think people are going to revert right back to the old system?
That's an interesting question and a very, very important question. I guess my initial thought on that would be if we get back to a normal situation where there is no COVID, there is no risk of the virus. We get back to where we were before March of 2020. I would say we probably do very little Zoom meetings and we get back together as people. That's the way you really communicate with each other, is through people. I mean, I've done, I'm a professional speaker. That's what I do for a living. And a lot of years I've done 60 to 80 presentations throughout the country in a year. That was pretty normal. A lot of flying. I have not been on an airplane since March 2nd of last year. That's almost a year ago.
Wow.
I do a lot of my presentations now by Zoom. I don't care how great the Zoom is. It's not like being in front of the audience and seeing their facial expressions and them seeing my facial expressions and being able to shake hands with them and talk with them a little bit before you do your presentation. Just being together, I think is a tremendous plus, basically. And I would think a football team getting together would have that same situation.
Well, Jack, thanks again, and we will talk to you hopefully at the beginning of next season.
Great to see you guys, Roger, Michelle, and everything. Thank you very much. I've enjoyed it, and let's talk again soon.
Good to see everyone.